Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started today, I want to make a few brief announcements. We know many of you are listening in from far away and can't attend local events or programs. That's why we provide this free webinar series. We host multiple webinars per month, so please visit our website to view the Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started today, I want to make a few brief announcements. We know many of you are listening in from far away and can't attend local events or programs. That's why we provide this free webinar series. We host multiple webinars per month, so please visit our website to view the current schedule for 2018. Simply visit our website at www.johnson-center.org and click on the webinars link on the right-hand side. New webinars and events are often added, so if you are not on our email list, I encourage you to visit our website and click on the Join Our Email List link that appears on the homepage. To get instant news and events from the Johnson Center, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as we often announce grant and scholarship opportunities, research opportunities, and special events and presentations there. And be sure to check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Johnson Center. There you will find a library of several of our past webinars. Right now, we have an exciting online auction going to raise funds for grants and scholarships for summer programs and counseling services. Visit www.takeactionforautism.org to check out the auction catalog and register to bid. The auction will close on April 30th at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. Be sure to follow our colleagues at the Autism Research Institute as they host their own webinar initiative, and they share some great resources on their website and social media pages. If you would like a certificate of attendance after today's webinar, look for a follow-up email in your mailbox 1 hour after the webinar concludes, or look for the link on our YouTube channel in the webinar description. It will contain instructions on how to get your certificate. If you have questions during the live webinar, you may type them into your GoToWebinar control panel. If you are watching a recording of this webinar, you may email questions to the presenter at info@johnson-center.org. Today's webinar was prepared and presented by Dr. Claire Schutte and Amanda Tami. Dr. Schutte is the staff psychologist at the Johnson Center, where her clinical work focuses on diagnostics and assessments. She is also an active member of our research team. Amanda Tami heads up the counseling and ABA services here at the Johnson Center. Please welcome today's presenters.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today as we cover this important topic on tantrums, meltdowns, and outbursts. I helped create this webinar with Amanda Tami. She's not here to present with me today, so I'll be presenting the full topic. And we're going to be giving you strategies to help decrease these challenging behaviors in your home. What we're covering today are general tools and strategies for more specific application to your child's specific behaviors. Consult with a behavior specialist. And we're also going to be having an in-house workshop on June 21st in the morning, which will be covering similar topics, but it's going to be a much more interactive workshop where there will be a chance for parents and attendees to ask specific questions about how these strategies can be applied to their child's behavior. Again, check out our Facebook page for more information about that workshop this summer. Here's an outline of the topics that we're going to be covering today. I'll be starting with defining tantrums and meltdowns because these mean different things. You might hear various words to describe these events, such as outbursts, the child's having a moment, they're freaking out, blowing up, exploding, etc. We're going to focus on meltdowns and tantrums, which we're going to be defining differently. For our purposes, a meltdown occurs when the nervous system is overwhelmed, such as by social, cognitive, linguistic, emotional, or sensory experiences. The meltdown is a release of tension that's built up, and it's really of a catastrophic magnitude. So these are very big kind of explosions and periods of overwhelm. This is an involuntary response. The individual cannot control it, and their intense emotions take over, and kids don't have the coping skills to manage them. They lose cognitive control and are unable to process and think. And when a meltdown happens, the recovery is pretty slow, about 15 to 20 minutes or longer once the stressor is removed. A tantrum, on the other hand, is a deliberate response to frustration. This is a learned behavior, and the child has the control to choose to do it. As many of us have seen, tantrums can become emotional blackmail, meaning the threat of the child having a tantrum has everyone catering to his or her wants or needs. They get whatever they want, so they don't have a meltdown. In this way, the child can start running the household. And when a child has a tantrum, recovery is usually instantaneous once they get whatever it is that he or she wants. And you'll notice that the tears stop when you give them the toy, for example. So in this case, in the case of a tantrum, we need to determine what the function of the tantrum is. What are they getting out of it? And we'll talk more about this later. Thinking of meltdowns and tantrums in this way, the way we're going to respond to each will be different. For a meltdown, when the nervous system is overloaded, we want to try to proactively prevent them. When they do happen, calming techniques, solitude, and reassurance are our go-to responses. Try to use as few words as possible. During a meltdown, your child's emotional brain has taken over, and their ability to be rational and process information is turned off, and that includes language. They're not going to be able to fully comprehend explanations or logic during the meltdown. So give the child calming tools to help calm their nervous system so that their processing brains can come back online. This usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes. For a tantrum, remember we said that these are intentional and deliberate. Therefore, you don't want to negotiate. Don't give in. That would provide the reinforcement and make the tantrum more likely to happen again. You want to try your best to be assertive but calm and maintain whatever demands or consequences you've put in place. Explain the child's choices and consequences and then stick with them. Meltdowns and tantrums have different functions, so your response to each is going to be different. How do you know if a child's having a tantrum or a meltdown? Here are some things that you can look for that can help you decide. The intensity, especially how well they're able to come back down. A meltdown is going to take several minutes or even longer to calm down, and a tantrum can turn off right away when the child gets what they want. If behavioral interventions haven't worked, emotions can be stronger than reinforcement. So if the child isn't responding to different behavioral interventions, then it's likely that they're having more of a meltdown. Notice the body signals. Are they breathing very fast, fidgeting, picking at their skin or clothing? Is their body out of control? Those can be signs also that it's more of a meltdown. Notice patterns, what context the behavior's happening in, and what are the results of a behavioral assessment. And then simply ask the child how they're doing and see if there's any patterns that they can identify. Were they feeling very overwhelmed by the environment? Are they feeling anxious about something? That's typically a sign of a meltdown rather than a tantrum. Let's talk a little bit more about meltdowns, and then we're going to spend the rest of the presentation giving you tools for dealing with tantrums. If your child has frequent meltdowns, consider speaking with a psychologist or a counselor about anxiety or potential emotional regulation issues your child might be having so that you can get some more specific guidance. Remember that a meltdown happens when the nervous system is overwhelmed. A child is so anxious, scared, and angry, even sometimes really happy, that their emotions become really intense and take over. While adults might have the coping strategies to prevent emotions from getting overwhelming or to manage them if they do, children often don't have these resources yet. So something we would see as a small problem might feel really big to a child and lead to this reaction. So give calming tools to your child when they are calm, when they're not having a meltdown, to see what helps their bodies become calmer, or what they especially like to do to know what works for them when the time comes that you need them. Prevention is the best cure for a meltdown. Once a child is in that meltdown state, it takes some good time for them to come out of it. If we can prevent them from getting there, that's what we want to do. As parents and teachers, you'll start to notice the child's triggers. So teaching the child to monitor their body and to identify when they might be starting to feel overwhelmed or in situations that you know cause intense emotions, and encourage calming strategies if you see it coming on. This can include things like taking a break from the stressful situation, having a safe or a calming space, using grounding techniques like mindfulness activities, wiggling their fingers or toes, and using sensory tools like silly putty or a fidget spinner. Find what works to help that individual child feel calm before a meltdown happens so that you know what to turn to when you need it. Next, it's important to be present and validate the child. Sit with them during a meltdown as they're going through this uncomfortable experience and engage with them emotionally. Show them that you feel what they're going through and understand it. Don't try to problem solve, fix it, ask questions, or distract them. Just be there with them and name and validate what they're going through. Name some emotions for them and tell them that it's okay to feel that way, and let them know it's normal and this shall pass. Some kids might prefer to be left alone during this time, and that's okay. Just join them in the emotions they're feeling, using as few words as possible. No explanations or lecturing. Next, parents need to try to stay as calm as possible during their child's meltdowns. The nervous systems of children are tied closely to those of their caregivers, and kids don't have the coping strategies or the knowledge or experience of their parents to regulate their nervous systems appropriately. Instead, their nervous systems are their parents' nervous systems. When parents feel scared, the kid feels scared. When parents feel happy, the kids feel happy. So if you get angry or anxious when your child has a meltdown, your child is going to sense that, and it makes it worse, even if they don't realize it. In addition, Tony Atwood, who's an Asperger's expert, says that kids with autism have a sixth sense in which they're able to feel the negative emotions of others. They can be hypersensitive to anger, sadness, and other negative emotions. So if you're angry, even if you don't show it, they're likely going to sense that. Finally, use containment strategies as a last resort if necessary to keep your child safe. If they pose a safety threat to themselves or others, use safe practices to contain him or her. When using containment, especially if you use it regularly, consider whether it might be reinforcing. For some individuals, the sensory stimulation or the attention that they get from containment can provide positive reinforcement. In this case, have other sensory stimulating activities in the environment or other methods of providing attention in the environment. And it is possible for a child to learn that their meltdown got them reinforcement, and then the behaviors can become deliberate. So once you get through a meltdown, go back to whatever task the child might have missed because of it, so that they don't learn that they get out of something, and have them practice and reinforce appropriate behaviors for getting attention or access to toys or activities. If you'd like to read about some further strategies for meltdowns, we have a blog post on our blog. There's a link here that you can reach it at. And now we're going to move into further discussion on managing tantrum behavior. To understand how to deal with tantrums, we first need to talk about reinforcement and the functions of behavior. So this is going to get a little bit technical here, but it's very important to have an understanding of this when you want to manage behavior that has a function. Before we talk about the functions of behavior, let's define reinforcement and punishment. These are words that all of you hear frequently from many sources, but they have very specific definitions in applied behavior analysis and the study of behavior. Reinforcement means that the consequence of a behavior makes it more likely that the behavior will happen again. Anything that increases the chance of a behavior happening again is reinforcement. Punishment means that the consequence of a behavior makes it less likely that the behavior will happen again. It's possible for something that was meant to be punishment is actually reinforcement if the behavior is happening more. The difference between the two is whether or not a behavior happens more or less frequently due to that consequence. So if you reprimand your child for hitting his brother, but he actually hits his brother more now, the reprimanding was reinforcing, not punishing, because the behavior happens more. There are both positive and negative forms of reinforcement and punishment. And positive and negative do not refer to good or bad. Rather, they refer to whether something is added or taken away. Positive reinforcement is adding a stimulus that results in an increase in the behavior in the future. So for example, you give praise after a behavior and the child does the behavior more. So you provide something and the behavior increases. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, is taking something away to increase the behavior in the future. So for example, you move away from the child when she attends as directed, so the child attends more. Positive punishment is adding a stimulus to decrease the behavior in the future. For example, you verbally reprimand a child for pushing another child, and as a result, he pushes other kids less. So again, punishment, you're seeing a decrease in the behavior. Negative punishment is removing something to decrease the behavior in the future. For example, the child takes away a token when the child gets up from his seat, so the child gets up fewer times. So again, with reinforcement, you're doing something that increases the likelihood of a behavior. With punishment, you're doing something that decreases the likelihood of a behavior happening. With positive, you're adding something, and with negative, you're taking something away. The function of a behavior is the reason the person is doing the behavior. So what are they getting out of it? How is it reinforcing? A behavior analyst would do a procedure called a functional behavior assessment to determine the function of behavior. This can get quite complex, but for our purposes here, the functions of behavior are the 4 A's. And these refer to attention, avoidance, access, and automatic. You might be able to figure out the function of your child's tantrums by looking at patterns of what comes before and after the tantrum. Parents, teachers, professionals can do their own informal assessment to see what's happening before the child does this, what's happening after, and that can give you information on why the child might be behaving as they are. And by the way, all behavior falls into one of these 4 functions, not just tantrums. So the first function I'm going to be describing is attention-seeking behavior. The individual behaves to get focused attention from parents, teachers, siblings, peers, or other people that are around them. Signs that the function of of the behavior is attention is when attention in any form, such as talking, smiling, hugs, or even reprimands, follows a behavior. The person might also come closer to or smile at the person before doing the behavior. I'm going to switch us over right now to a quick video that shows some tantrum behavior that is a function of attention.
Come on, Paul's watching. Go back to the kitchen. Go back to the living room. Where did he start?
The next function of behavior is, sorry about that, is escape or avoidance. So the individual behaves in order to get out of doing something that he or she does not want to do. You might see this behavior when you make certain demands, like give instructions or require the child to do specific things, or when some environmental stimuli are present. For example, a child might tantrum to escape a really loud room, or you tell the child to clean up their room, they throw themselves on the floor and get out of helping clean up would be another example. I'm going to show you a quick video here of escape maintained behavior in a dog.
Get in the back. Get in the back. Come on. Get in the back. Come on. Come on, bud. Move. Come on. Come on. Get in the back. Get in the back of the car. Come on. No. Am I supposed to ride in the back? Get in the back. Come on. Come on.
The next function of behavior is seeking access to materials or activities. So the individual behaves in order to get a preferred item or participate in an enjoyable activity. If this is the function of the behavior, you might see the behavior when the item is taken away, or if you wait too long to give it to the child, or you deny them having it at all, as in this example.
Sweetie, we're not getting a toy right now. Put that down, okay? Put that down. Let's get ready to go bye-bye. Do you need a toy, really? Put that down. I know, but Grandmama's going to get you a toy later. Let's put that down, okay? Oh, my goodness. Really? Let's put that down, now. Put that down, London. Come on, Lily. Let's go. Put that down. Put it down. Put it down. Put it down. We'll pick a toy from the front of the store. I know, but we'll get a toy from the front of the store. Look how big London's being. He's such a big boy. And what are you being? A baby.
And then the last function of behavior is automatic. The individual behaves in a specific way because it feels good to them. This can be self-stimulatory reinforcement, which can be vestibular, visual, audible, tactile, or touch, or it can be external, which would be pleasing sounds, sights, tastes, smells in the environment. So with automatic reinforcement, the behavior in and of itself is reinforcing. In this next video, it's just going to show an activity that is simply reinforcing in and of itself. Your first step in changing your child's behavior or decreasing tantrums is figuring out what is the function. What are they getting out of it? Is it attention maintained? Are they trying to escape or avoid something? Are they doing it because they want access to materials or an activity? Or is it automatic reinforcement? They have tantrums because they have learned that it works in getting something. So your first job is to be a detective and to figure out what that is. If you're unable to do so, or if the behavior involves self-harm or harm to others, consult with a specialist to help you. Tantrums and other challenging behavior is often learned to fulfill a function when the child doesn't know more appropriate behaviors to fulfill those functions. So working only to change the challenging behavior leads to a different challenging behavior. You don't allow them to have a tantrum, so they figure out another way to get the need met, which is usually another behavior you don't want. So you need to consider skill delays and build the skill set to replace the challenging behavior. You want to teach them functional ways to get their needs met. Children with autism typically show fewer skills compared to their neurotypical peers, and the gap gets wider with age. A typically developing 2-year-old might have a few hundred skills by the age of 2 and thousands by the age of 10, whereas a child with autism might have half the number of skills by age 2 and largely plateaus shortly after. There can be an exponential gap between that child with autism and a typically developing child by the age of 10 if the child with autism does not get intervention. The typically developing child is learning more complex ways of interacting with the world and getting their needs met and their wants met, while the child with autism does not. So by specifically teaching skills in areas where the child with autism is delayed, we can help narrow that gap and increase effectiveness in getting their needs met. So you really want to not only decrease challenging behaviors, but increase functional skills. Skill delays are indicated by behavior deficits and behavior excesses. Behavior deficit means that there's not enough of a behavior, and excesses mean that there's too much of something. When behaviors are delayed or deficient, we want to teach and reinforce those skills, such as language, play, social skills, joint attention, theory of mind, executive functioning. These are just a few. When behaviors are happening too much, including tantrums, but also things like self-stimming behaviors, noncompliance, isolation, there are behavior management strategies that can reduce those behaviors. But we also need to think about the behavior deficits. What skills are lacking that make this behavior excess necessary? The child is doing this unwanted behavior because they don't have the skills to meet the function in a better way. So we need to increase skills and decrease challenging behaviors at the same time. So we need both skill development and behavior management strategies and interventions. So let's move on to strategies for dealing with tantrums and put these ideas into practice. A simple way to think about decreasing tantrums is this equation. We use a process called extinction combined with reinforcement of an alternative or more functional behavior. So in other words, the tantrum no longer works to meet the function of the tantrum. Again, the function might be attention, access, avoidance, or automatic. And we teach a different behavior that now does work to meet that function. So the child no longer turns to tantruming to get that function. Let's look at this more closely, starting with extinction. So extinction is the withholding of reinforcement following a behavior that has previously resulted in reinforcement. So when we put tantrums on extinction, we no longer give reinforcement for tantrums. You basically don't give them what they want. If you found that the function of the behavior is avoidance, don't take away what they are trying to avoid. In other words, don't let them get out of it. If it's attention, don't talk to them, even to reprimand them. Even reprimands can be attention. Or give nonverbal attention, such as affection or looking at them. You can prompt them to do what you need to do to keep them safe, but do it with as little interaction as possible. If the function is access to an item or activity, don't give them that item or activity. If it's automatic, meaning having a tantrum is in and of itself reinforcing, find a way to block the reinforcement. For example, do they like the sound of their voice when they're screaming or crying? Give them noise-canceling headphones. Do they engage in pleasure-seeking self-injury? Block them from doing the behavior. Automatic reinforcement can be very difficult, so do consider consulting with a behavior specialist if the function seems to be automatic reinforcement. In conjunction with extinction, we need to also teach the replacement behavior, a more functional or alternative behavior to get their needs met. We're teaching that tantrums no longer work to get the child what he or she wants, but this other behavior is going to work. We're not trying to deprive them of what they want or need, but rather we're teaching a new way to get it. Tantruming no longer works, and instead this other behavior gets you this need or want met. It's very important to teach this replacement behavior. If we don't teach the child what to do, instead of having a tantrum, they're going to find another way to get this need met, and it's often another challenging or unwanted behavior. You may have to teach a brand new behavior. Remember the skill delays? If they don't know how to meet the function of the behavior in a more appropriate way, you need to teach him or her how to do that. Or maybe your child already knows how to do the more appropriate behavior, and in that case, you need to prompt them to do it at the right time, and then make sure you reinforce that appropriate behavior. So here are some examples. If a child throws a fit to get what he or she wants, Teach them to ask nicely for the object. If they scream to escape a task, teach them to ask for a break. If the child is tantruming or hits you to get their attention, teach them to call your name. If they self-stimulate, teach them something more appropriate to do. For example, have another stimulating activity available. Teach him or her to go to his room to hear himself scream without others around. The child behaves badly because they're trying to communicate something and they just don't know how to communicate it in the way you want. So you really want to make sure that as you're decreasing and using the behavior management strategies to decrease the behavior, that again, you're teaching them functional ways to get their needs met that are appropriate. What about punishment? We always recommend that you use the combination of extinction plus reinforcement of an alternative behavior over punishment. That's what we were just talking about. So you're using behavior management strategies to decrease the tantrum behavior while teaching a more appropriate and functional way to get their needs met. There's several reasons for why we don't recommend punishment. First, remember that punishment is anything that decreases the likelihood of a behavior happening again. This sounds great, right? But it can be more complicated than that. In order to decrease the behavior, we need to make sure that we're still using the correct function. If you give a child a timeout because he or she bit their sister to get a toy, that could decrease the behavior since you're not awarding the reinforcement. However, if you give a child a timeout because they bit the sister to get away from the sister, you've actually reinforced the behavior by taking them away. So what you think of as punishment might not really be punishment depending on what the function is. And you might actually end up reinforcing the behavior when you're trying to decrease it. In addition, when we use punishment, we're not teaching the child what they should be doing instead. Remember that when we only try to minimize a problem behavior, a new problem behavior often pops up again. So we need to be teaching a child what to do instead of that unwanted behavior rather than just punishing them for doing it. With some forms of punishment, such as timeout, we're also taking away the opportunity to teach them that new behavior. It's much more effective to prompt and praise wanted behavior in the moment while it's happening than to use punishment and then try to go back to the situation and teach a new behavior minutes later or at a later time. A behavior that is present, so in the moment, is much more concrete for a child's understanding than when the behavior is absent. So those are the reasons that the combination of extinction plus reinforcement of an alternative behavior is much better than punishment. So we've covered strategies for figuring out the function and decreasing the challenging behavior while reinforcing an alternative behavior. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about strategies that you can use to prevent tantrums from happening. I'm going to start with defining the ABCs of behavior. These refer to what happens before the behavior, or the antecedent, and then the consequence. Tantrums can be prevented or lessened through what are called antecedent interventions. These are ways of changing the environment to set up the child for success and avoid continuing to elicit a tantrum behavior in the future. So it's basically strategies that you can use before the behavior might occur to try to decrease the chances of it occurring. One type of antecedent intervention is to provide visual supports. Visual supports are great to use with children. In particular, children with autism often really respond well to visuals. Some examples of visual supports are visual prompts, first and then charts, redirection cards, visual timers, and schedules. First and then pictures such as this one right here help the child see what happens now and then next. A visual timer like this here can help with transitions by showing visually how much time is left for activities and prompt the child that the time is almost up. And visual schedules like this one are a great tool for transitions. It helps the child see what activities are ahead and prompt them for a transition coming. Token economies and charts are another helpful visual antecedent intervention. These help provide expectations for what reinforcement the child will receive if they engage in a positive behavior. These can also include consequences for maladaptive behaviors such as tantrums by taking a coin, a token, or a star away. And in turn, these increase the likelihood of eliciting positive behaviors. Providing choices to children often helps them feel more in control. If you have a toddler or work with toddlers, you know that control is very big. If they're able to make choices independently, they're typically less likely to have a tantrum over their choice. Choices can be given verbally or visually. I like this example of a visual choice board because it gives the child choices of what they can do if they get upset. This can help prevent tantrums by giving them ideas of functional ways of coping before the behavior escalates into a tantrum. For example, they can choose to read, rest, or listen to music or another type of calming activity. This would also work, this type of visual, as a prevention tool for meltdowns as well. For a child that has frequent meltdowns, having some type of coping chart where if they start to feel themselves getting overwhelmed or a teacher or a parent notices, they can be presented with this and it can show them different choices for calming activities. There are ways to change the actual environment that might help prevent tantrums, such as making the environment enriching, changing the placement or setup of the environment. For example, if a classroom is too open and tantrums are elicited by sensory overstimulation, you might try rearranging the classroom to make it smaller or have quiet areas or peaceful break corners. You can also change how information is presented in the environment, such as using plenty of pictures, modifying the lighting, changing how loud the classroom is. That's a very excited, enthusiastic woman right there. This picture is depicting what is called non-contingent reinforcement. Non-contingent reinforcement involves giving the child access to a reinforcer frequent enough that they're no longer motivated to engage in a problematic behavior in order to get it. For example, giving a child access to attention often enough that they don't have to tantrum to get it, or giving them enough breaks so that they don't need to tantrum in order to escape. It's important to remember to use praise and to make sure you're using more praise than demands. Generally, the ratio of 4 praises to 1 demand or reprimand is recommended. So in more simple terms, you want to try to remember to be praising the child 4 times more than making demands. Praise the positive behaviors you want to see, and those will happen more. You also want to try to avoid walking on eggshells and doing everything in your power to prevent a tantrum. Some kids learn that they can control their entire household by threatening to have a tantrum. Parents will do or give them anything to keep them from having a tantrum, but again, the key is replacing them with more functional behaviors. For example, you don't want to give your child every possible toy or snack they might beg for to prevent them from having a tantrum. The goal is to teach them more functional ways of behaving and getting what they want and helping them cope appropriately. So those are some tools that can help prevent tantrums. And now I want to talk a little bit about behavior change and what to expect, because it's very important to have accurate expectations when you're working on decreasing tantrum behavior, and it can be a lot trickier. It's easier said than done. It's important to remember that one aspect of behavior change is that things can get worse before they get better. So you're going to have to stick with it, but remember, you might see some increases in behavior before you see the decrease. When behavior gets worse soon after applying an extinction-based intervention, it's called an extinction burst. So you see a big boom in the behavior. Oftentimes when you remove the function of the tantrum, or in other words, the tantrum isn't working anymore, the child might try even harder and the behavior will get worse. Sort of like, I'm going to try crying even harder and then my mom will give me what I want. This might go on for some time until the child learns that their tantrums are no longer going to result in what they wanted. When the behavior gets worse like this can be a breaking point for parents. However, it's important not to give in even if that tantrum behavior escalates, because the child's then going to keep trying. Children are very smart, and they will pick up on, well, mom or dad gave in that one time, so I'm going to keep trying. But over time, if you do stick with it, extinction will occur. Occasionally, there's what's called spontaneous recovery, so you might still see it here and there, but overall, if you stick with these interventions, you're going to see a decreasing trend in the behavior. And again, you're going to be teaching the child better ways of getting what they want, so they're going to be happier overall with that behavioral decrease. When thinking about change, it's important to consider these elements. So first, it's going to take some time. The child must realize that their behavior is no longer working, and they also must learn effective, more appropriate ways of communicating and coping. It's super important, and this is so hard, to remain as consistent as possible. If a child's tantrum is occasionally reinforced, like I mentioned before, they're going to keep trying. It's going to take effort, and oftentimes it is quicker to just give in to the tantrum, but this isn't going to lead to positive behavior change over time. So try to remember that when you're about to give up. And then another important thing that you want to remember is you want to generalize your intervention across all environments and people where it's occurring. Kids are really quick learners, and they're going to notice who and where they can get away with tantrums. Lots of times you hear, grandparents, the child might fuss a little bit and they'll get the candy. And kids will learn quickly that when they're with their grandparents, if they throw a tantrum, they might get what they want. Or they might learn that at school, I can get away with this, but not at home, or vice versa. So it's really important that whichever environments the behavior is happening, are also applying those strategies the same way within those different environments. Otherwise, you're not going to see what you're wanting to see. Okay, and then we're going to wrap up now with talking about some tricky situations and how to deal with them, because tantrums can occur in the most inopportune of times. If you're a parent, you've likely encountered one of these tricky situations. Your child throws an epic tantrum in the store for a snack, they arch their back and scream in their car seat, or you're stuck on a plane and they're screaming that they want something that you don't have, and you start to feel those looks of strangers. You probably feel like your blood pressure is steadily rising, your cheeks are turning red, or you might burst into tears at any moment. Tantrums can really happen in the most inopportune times. Stay strong. Remember, you want to remain as consistent as possible in your approach. Therefore, you might have to deal with a tantrum in public, which can be very difficult and feel very embarrassing. You might get some looks from strangers, people in the grocery line, but remember that most parents have been there. Try to keep a firm voice and find a safe place to allow your child to tantrum if needed. If it's interfering with your driving, try pulling over. Remember to use the antecedent interventions I discussed if you foresee a potential tantrum happening in one of these tricky environments, such as on an airplane. Remember, try creating a picture schedule. Use those first and then statements or cards. Create reinforcers for positive behavior and bring helpful redirection activities. Again, all of this is easier said than done. So be patient with yourself and remember, stick with it. Another tricky situation is separation anxiety. So you drop your child off at school or have to leave them with someone new, and it triggers a tantrum or a meltdown. Typically, this is due to separation anxiety, and this refers to fear or anxiety about separating from home or from a caregiver. It's important to remember that the anxiety tends to be higher before you go compared to after. Most children will calm down once you leave. Some things that can help if the child continues to be upset after a caregiver leaves is to let them have a transitional object, such as a blanket or a lovey, creating a calming, safe place for them, offering comfort, and providing plenty of prompts so that they know what to expect. Also try using other antecedent strategies, such as a picture schedule that shows drop-off, main activities, and then the caregiver coming home. And typically, once the routine is more established and the child knows what to expect, it will get better. However, some children have more separation anxiety and might need further support from a counselor. Tantrums can be very challenging and stressful, and it's really easy as parents or caregivers to lose your cool. Here's some tips that can help you keep your cool. Don't forget to breathe. That one's much easier said than done. If possible, take a step away from the tantrum, even if it's just turning away for a minute, turning the music up. Use a neutral, firm voice. Remember, the more you escalate, the further your child is likely to escalate, and you want to be a model of positive behavior. As stated earlier, consistency is critical. Allow the tantrum to run its course. This can be very uncomfortable, but it's okay. Try to work on being comfortable with some of that uncomfortableness. While your child is tantruming, try reflecting their feelings, such as, I can see you're really angry, or you're upset because you can't have the toy. This helps the child feel heard. And don't forget self-care for yourself. This can include venting to someone or doing an activity to decompress after a long day. And if you feel at a loss with managing your child's challenging behavior, seek help from a specialist. And then here's some resources for additional help. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be hosting a workshop on July 21st from 9:30 to 11:30. It's going to be covering strategies for dealing with tantrums and meltdowns, similar to what we covered today, but it's going to be much more interactive. It's going to provide more detailed strategies. It'll be more hands-on, and we'll be able to provide more individualized guidance. And we're also offering free childcare for that workshop. As I've mentioned, consult a behavior specialist if you're ever in question or feel overwhelmed. And then some helpful books are Parenting with Positive Behavior Support, a practical guide for resolving your child's difficult behavior. And also a good basic book on behavior analysis and applying the strategies that we talked about today is Applied Behavior Analysis for Teachers. And then a great website for accessing different visual printables and aids is do2learn.com. And don't forget that we'll be uploading this webinar onto our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to rewatch it, go back to any portions that you need to follow up with. And let's see, it looks like we have a little bit of time here for a few questions. So I'm just going to read through the questions that have been submitted, so bear with me for a moment. Okay, how do you know if your child is having a tantrum or a meltdown? We went over this in one of the earlier slides where I talked about the intensity, or does the behavior stop when what they wanted is removed? And you know your child's best. You want to consider the context and the environment. Are these conditions that would have been overwhelming for your child? Have you noticed a pattern in terms of what happens before and after the behavior? Does it tend to only occur in very overstimulating type environments? But those are going to help give some clues. But I would also recommend going back to the meltdown slides that we showed today and going over the list of things to look for in terms of identifying whether it's a meltdown. Okay, here's another question. My child is only having meltdowns at school, but not at home. What should we do? That's a great question, and that kind of builds upon what I was talking about in terms of generalization. When you're working on these behaviors, whether it be meltdown behaviors or tantrums, you want to observe how they're happening across environments. So if a child is having meltdowns at school but not at home, there's likely something that is triggering the meltdowns at school. It's likely an environmental variable that the school has that home doesn't. So you really want to observe and assess what those triggers are. It might be something like sensory overstimulation. Typically, the school environment can be more stimulating or loud than the home environment. Ask the teacher, ask your child if they're able to communicate what it is. Are they getting enough breaks? Are they able to communicate their needs? Is there something bothering them? And you want to figure out what calming strategies work at school. Assess any environmental variables. Are there strategies that you've been using at home that are calming that a teacher could apply at school? And figure out what's different between the environments. And then if you are still struggling with managing the meltdowns at school, seek the help from a specialist, a behavior specialist who works with the school district can come and observe the behavior and come up with an intervention and coping plan for the child as well. Okay, that wraps up our presentation today. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you are leaving today's presentation with lots of strategies to tackle behavior. And again, come see us for our workshop. You can get more information on that Tantrums and Meltdowns workshop on our Facebook page. And here are the links to sign up to how to keep up with us in our events. Thank you.